you can hear me and if I'm audible to you.
Yeah.
Okay. So good evening, everybody. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Shelly Parekh. I've been part of the Idea Research Desk for the last 4 years now, where I've essentially looked at fundamental research, and we do research more on micro caps and small caps, mid caps, as you all would have probably observed over the last 4 years. Um, my endeavor today and over the course of the next few sessions is going to be to get all of you acquainted, familiarized, and maybe develop some understanding on certain basic concepts of fundamental research. Today, I'm sure all of you read a lot of our reports. Sometimes you all don't know what aspects of the report you'll need to look at, or whilst you're speaking to clients, what is it that you need to focus on. Also, I've often seen that people look at fundamental research with very starry eyes, and everyone feels like only the very learned or very accomplished people can do it, and you really need to be an expert to be able to do fundamental research, which is not the case. I think if you need to just sort of look at the hygiene factors of any company, it's not so difficult. You just need to sort of put yourself, I mean, when you just have to think as if you're investing your own money, and kind of apply a lot of this to your actual lives, and really it's not such a difficult process thereafter. Let's start with basically what is fundamental analysis. As you can read, it is a method used to determine the value of a stock by analyzing the financial data that is fundamental to the company. Now, let us first establish the fact that all of us are here in the market basically to make money. How are we going to do that? Well, you either obviously either by buying or selling. So essentially, what you need to be looking for is valuation gaps for mispricing. So when you're talking about the value of a company, you're basically talking about the intrinsic value of a company, which is nothing but the organic, the core, the inherent value of a company. So typically, in the long run, in the short run, there might be gaps between what the inherent value of a company is versus the market price. So assuming that the inherent value of a company is 100 and the market price is 90, which means over a period of time that 90 is going to move towards the 100, which basically means that right now that stock is undervalued, which is why you will go and buy that stock. Conversely, if the intrinsic value of a company is 100 and the market price is say 110, over a period of time, which may be a year or 2 years, the intrinsic value and the market price tend to move towards each other, which means this 110 is probably going to correct and come closer towards 100, which means the stock is overvalued, and which means that you essentially must sell. Now, there are various ways of finding the value of a company. It also depends on various factors, such as the quality of the management, what is the business outlook for the company, how fast it's going to grow, the outlook on the industry as a whole, and of course the economy too. So like I said, the main purpose we'll be doing fundamental analysis is to, like I've mentioned here, identify undervalued stocks to buy and overvalued stocks to sell. But what we also need to remember is that timing is of essence, and the timing will determine the quantum of gains or losses. Now, what are the various steps in fundamental analysis? You basically start from the top. So you start with economic analysis. I think the slide is pretty self-explanatory. When you're talking about economic analysis, you're referring to economic factors, which would be GDP rates, unemployment rates, currency, interest rates. These are the factors that you're talking about when you're looking at economic analysis. And then you see the impact of all these factors on an industry and then a company. Thereafter comes the industry analysis. Now, there are various ways, there are various methods that are used to analyze an industry. Like there are certain models, some of you might have heard of them. You have the Michael Porter's 5-force model. You have the BCG group, analysis. These are all methods and ways that people use in order to analyze an industry. Now, when you're talking about an industry, you're basically looking at, buyers, sellers, competitors, entry barriers. These are all the various factors that you would want to analyze when you're looking at an industry. The intensity of competition would also determine your pricing power. Hence, if it's an industry where competition is very high, that you don't have the kind of pricing power you want, which is which is eventually obviously going to impact your margins. So it's very, very important, to study an industry before you get into it. Even, the threat of entrance, higher the entry barriers, better. And entry barriers could be, it could be in form of technology, it could be in form of capital intensity. There are various and barriers to entry. Sometimes it's a lot of compliance that you need to set up. There could be regulatory networks. So there are various factors which affect the industry. Coming to company analysis, yeah, as it suggests, we are basically analyzing a company. There are again various ways that a company is analyzed. You can use the SWOT analysis, which basically means strengths, weakness, opportunity, and threats. So you look at a company and try and categorize it across these 4 parameters. And of course, company analysis, we look at this in the next slide, that a company analysis is done both on basis of qualitative as well as quantitative factors. But before we move on to that, a very commonly heard term for all of us is top-down and bottoms-up approach. Very simple to understand. Again, what top-down means, if you just look at this slide, if you're moving from economic analysis to company analysis, then you're basically looking at a top-down approach. And if you're going from a company analysis to a more broader framework, then it's a bottoms-up approach. Now, a classic example, like the most current example, live example that all of you would be able to relate to immediately is the impact of COVID. When you look at the impact of COVID, and in this context, look at which industries may get affected, which industries will benefit, which industries will stand to lose. You're basically looking at a top-down approach. So when you say, because of COVID, your staples, your consumer staples are going to do good. But on the other hand, companies that say probably made biometric scan machines, those companies are not going to do good. So, when you're looking at sectors because of an event that affects everybody, you're basically looking at a top-down approach. And if you look at bottoms-up approach, it is basically, start with a company. It's a company, it's a name that you could have come across, through literature, through friends, through word of mouth. And then you start looking at that company specific factors. You go into depth, the P&L and balance sheet of that company, factors that affect that company. And then you move towards a broader spectrum. So at Idea Desk, we used to always do a bottoms-up approach, where we have picked up on, stock-specific ideas and then, try to see it in a larger scheme of things. So top-down and bottoms-up approach, that is. Now, we come to basically company analysis. Company analysis is nothing but, when you're evaluating a company's performance based on both its quantitative and qualitative factors. And you're also cognizant of the risks associated with it and the returns it can generate. When you're looking at qualitative factors, these are factors which are not measurable. So, the nature of business, the management quality, corporate governance. Corporate governance is a very, very important aspect. I think, especially in a bad market, I think we must place utmost importance to corporate governance. A lot of people will ask, how do you understand if the management is good, or, if the corporate governance standards are good? Some of the ways, to find out or understand is, one is go through their annual report, see the number of independent directors that are on the board, see the qualifications of those directors, see how many meetings they hold. That would give you some sense. Of course, these days, a lot of boards, comprise of directors who are friends, of the promoter. So well, it's really it's just something that you need to tick mark, but nevertheless, I think you should do that. And another way is also, you can look at the guidance that a company gives versus the actuals. Of course, this you'll be able to analyze over a period of time, and then you understand when a management generally tends to over guide and under deliver, or where the management is conservative and then they tend to give that guidance. The latter is obviously better than the former. Always makes sense to play conservative and then positively surprise people. Another good way of looking at this is through con calls. Hearing the con calls, how regularly they interact with investors, how transparently they share information. And I think it's important to remember that people, investors, the market will forgive an incompetent management, but it won't forgive an unethical management. So please understand the difference between the two. It is very, very important, especially at a time like this. Moving on to the quantitative factors, these are the factors that we are going to be looking into. So obviously, quantitative refers to numbers. So you're basically looking at the P&L, the balance sheet. You will calculate your ratios. You look at the leverage. You'll see the operating margins. You'll see how effectively, how efficiently the company is utilizing its resources. So these are all the quantitative factors. And earnings, of course. Earnings is extremely important. That is the crux of everything that we do, is basically to arrive at the earnings, because finally it is based on these earnings and the projected growth of these earnings that you will arrive at the value of the company. Coming to ratio analysis, based on all the quantitative factors, we conduct ratio analysis. It is a very, very important tool, and it is well, as an analyst, my life begins and ends with ratios, to be honest. And they help us to look at numbers more effectively. Numbers by themselves, absolute numbers by themselves don't tell us much unless and until you convert them into ratios, which then make them more comparable. Whether, to past year performance, previous year performance, other competitors in the industry, or whether you're trying to compare one industry with the other. So ratios are extremely important. You will calculate historical ratios, you will calculate ratios of the ongoing financial year, and you will, of course, calculate ratios of the years to come. Typically, we all try and work with 2-year forward numbers. Very, very few times you're able to do 3-year forward numbers. And in many companies, it's hard to even take a view beyond a year. So it really varies from industry to industry. There are broadly 5 categories of ratios. You have solvency ratios, profitability ratios, leverage, efficiency, and investment ratios. In my presentation today, we are going to be covering solvency and profitability, wherein I'll be covering about 4 very critical ratios. I'll explain more about them when we get to it, get to the next slide. But if you look at leverage ratios, it basically talks about the proportion of debt in the overall mix, and how levered your company is. It's very important to understand that the company isn't borrowing more than it can service. So it's very, very important ratios. Efficiency is basically telling you how efficiently you're using your resources. So you're basically talking about your asset turns over there. And then your investment ratios, which is you're talking about your valuations over there. So whether price to book, EV by EBITDA, P, all of that will be covered in investment ratios. So starting with solvency ratios, it basically tells you about the liquidity of the company, and it is helping you to measure the ability of a company to repay its short-term debt obligations. There are various ratios that one looks at in solvency ratios, which you can see below. You have current ratio, quick ratio, cash ratio, and cash conversion cycle. I'm essentially going to be focusing on cash conversion cycles. But before I do that, just to tell you a little on solvency ratios, what you're basically doing is you're comparing the company's most liquid assets with its short-term liabilities. So in general, greater the coverage of liquid assets to short-term liabilities, obviously the better it is. And which basically tells you that the company is, after paying off its debt obligations in the near term, it can still fund its ongoing operations. Whereas on the other hand, if the coverage rate is low, this is clearly a red flag, because it would mean that the company will have difficulty in running its operations as well as meeting its obligations in the near term. So across the three ratios that are mentioned below, current ratio, quick ratio, and cash ratio, what's important to notice is that the denominator, sorry, the numerator changes in all of these. In the first ratio, we are taking all current assets. In quick ratio, we are taking only cash, short-term investments, and accounts receivables. And then in cash ratio, you're taking only cash and cash equivalents. So basically, your cash ratio is your most conservative ratio, where you're only taking ready cash and cash equivalents. Whereas current ratio will include a lot of other current assets which are not immediately convertible into cash, so which are not liquid in nature. Uh, um, Obviously, this ratio, greater than 1, higher the better. Um, but it's not something that we use in our day-to-day research, honestly. I'm teaching y'all this, or I'm introducing this to y'all just for the sake of learning. Not like any of us ever calculate any of these ratios. What's important is the cash conversion cycle, however. It, in very simple terms, cash conversion cycle measures the length of time the cash remains tied up in the manufacturing and selling of products. So from the time you buy your raw material to the time you actually finish manufacturing, the goods hit the market, the time that is taken, is the amount of time that your cash remains tied up, and that is your cash conversion cycle. So naturally, shorter the cycle, it would mean, that you're more efficient in handling, your business, and which means you have higher liquidity because your cash is not remaining tied up for a very long time. So if you have a cash conversion cycle of 30 days versus 90 days, which means on day 1 of 30, I put in my money, and day 30, it has not converted. So on day 1, when you bought raw material, cash has got converted into raw material, and on day 30, your sale is happening, and again, that product is getting converted into cash. So obviously, a 30-day cycle is going to be better than a 90-day cycle. So like I said, the importance of this cycle, of this ratio, is that it basically is an indicator of the company's efficiency in managing its working capital. And it also provides a clear view of a company's ability to pay off its current liabilities. Now, the formula of cash conversion cycle is your inventory days. To that, you add your debtor days. And from that, you subtract your creditor days. And I have mentioned the formulas below. Subsequently, of course, in the next couple of days, I will send you all a small case study, or I'll probably send you all a small exercise for all of you to do, where you will be able to calculate these ratios. And then, probably it would help put this into better perspective for all of you. Moving on to profitability ratios. Now, profit, if you look at, in a company, you're basically measuring profits at various levels. There are 4 clear levels of profit, so to say. You have your gross profit, you have your operating profit, you have your profit before tax and after tax. But generally, the ones that we focus on are your gross margins, your operating margins, and your net profit margins. Of these 3 also, your operating or your EBITDA margins. I'm sure all of you have heard EBITDA time and again. EBITDA margin is most critical, and I will even tell you why. Now, your gross profit margin basically refers to your revenues less your cost of goods sold. Now, raw material cost is more or less the same for everyone. There isn't a lot of difference here. Yeah, there would be some difference in case-to-case basis depending on scale of operations. So if you have, you have more bargaining power, obviously, your cost of raw material is going to come down, but largely it's uniform for everybody in the same industry. Hence, it doesn't necessarily demonstrate the ability or the competence of the management. comes below gross profit is basically you're looking at all your fixed expenses. You're looking at rent, salaries, you're looking at other overheads, and how a management or a company is able to manage these expenses is critical, because this is where you'd be able to, discern one company from the other. This is, where the differentiating factor lies. And hence the EBITDA margin is a far better indicator of a company's uh, performance and, management competence versus the gross profit margin. And it's very easy to calculate the EBITDA margin. It's basically EBITDA divided by net sales multiplied by 100. Now, EBITDA is nothing but earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortizations. So EBITDA margin is extremely important. You also, you would use this to compare one company with other of the, from the same industry. So it helps you doing your peer comparisons, understand, which company is performing better than the other. And last, of course, comes your net profit margin, which is nothing but your net profit divided by net sales. But what one needs to understand sometimes is between EBITDA and net profit, you will have depreciation, you will have interest, you will have other income, and you have taxes. So net profit margin may not be a very accurate indicator, because assuming there are companies that, are enjoying tax exemptions, or, in case of agri companies, where agri income is not taxable, naturally, your profits are going to are going to be higher. Hence, again, even like a depreciation gets governed by, the life of your assets. It would also depend on the intensity of capex. Interest gets affected by the extent of leverage in the company. Other income, also would include forex gains, and so sometimes, these tend to inflate or deflate profits. Hence again we come back to the point that EBITDA margin is a much better indicator um, of performance versus the net profit margins. And of course, in all these ratios, logically, higher the ratio, better it is. Now, the reason why we convert these into ratios, and we convert this into percentage, and we look at profit, you do a profit margin analysis, is basically you want to, like I said, you want to compare with other companies in the same industries. A positive margin analysis would yield positive investment quality, and it also facilitates trend analysis, which means that you can study a company over a period of, say, 8 to 10 years, or maybe 5 years, to understand the consistency in your margins. Also, absolute numbers sometimes don't give us an accurate picture. For example, if there is a profit of 10 rupees on revenues of 100 rupees, this would mean that your profit margin is 10%. But if you have a 10 rupees profit on, say, 50 rupees, then your margins are 20%. Hence, it is very important to, convert your ratio, your absolute numbers into margins, in order to be able to get a more accurate picture. Coming to return ratios, these basically tell you how well resources are being used to generate returns. There are 3 critical return ratios that we will look at: return on equity, return on capital employed, and return on assets. Now, if we are to first talk about return on equity, it measures how much the shareholders earn from their investment in the company. Let me give you an example again. You start a business with an investment of 100 rupees, and a year later, you have generated 20 rupees profit from it. So what is your return on equity? It's nothing but 20 divided by 100, converted into percentage, which basically means 20%. Now, but let's take this a step further. You started your business with, say, 100 rupees, and then you also borrowed 200 rupees of debt, because 100 rupees was not sufficient for you to grow your business. And perhaps you say you grew your business, your profit, say, grew to 25. Or to make matters simple for ease of calculations, let's say you continue to generate 20 rupees. You couldn't increase it, which means your total return that you generated, when you look at return on equity, it appeared at 20%. But if you're going to see the total capital employed, which is 100 plus 200 of debt, then you're looking at a lower number, which I think would be in the vicinity of maybe 6%. 15, 6 or 90. No, we are basically looking at a lower number. So return on equity is going to tell you, what you've generated on the money that you have invested. Higher the ratio, obviously better. It should be compared with other peers from the same industry. You cannot look at it in isolation, as I said and explained, because you also need to see the level of debt that is involved, and it should always be greater than the cost of equity. Now, as an investor, obviously you have multiple avenues where you can invest your money, whether it is debt, whether it is fixed deposits, whether it is gold, or whichever asset class. Now, obviously, so if you're looking at GSETs, it's a virtually risk-free return. Then if you're looking at maybe investing your money in a fixed deposit, it's not as risk-free as maybe the GSET was. So you're going to expect slightly better returns. Basically, your returns is a compensation that you expect, after factoring in the risk. Now, when you're looking at investing in equities, obviously there is no guarantee, there is no assurance on what future numbers are going to look at. Of course, our endeavor as analysts is to project and to understand what the growth trajectory will be going ahead. Having said that, there are obviously no guarantees. Hence, the cost of equity is nothing but the return that an investor expects from the company so that he will partake with his money. So obviously, if my cost of equity, then today your cost of equity would be anywhere in excess of maybe 12 or 13% easy. So obviously, if I am expecting a 12 or 13%, this is my expectation. This is what will make me give you my money. But when I am investing, in your equity, I am becoming a partner in your profits as well as your losses. Hence, when I'm giving my money to you, my expectation is of a 12 or 13%. I would expect that the company would deliver beyond 13%. That is when it becomes a good investment for me. Hence, ROE. Now, if you have to just look at the formula, ROE basically is equal to your net income upon average shareholders' equity expressed as a percentage. Typically now, if you look at, different sectors, you will see, the spectrum of ROEs. Now, generally your consumer staples, then whether, you're talking about IT, then comes your gas distribution companies, followed by auto, pharma, then cap goods, then cement, then banks, media, infra. This is, the hierarchy of return ratio. So your consumer staples enjoy the highest return on equity of about 35 to 95%, like HUL, Britannia, Nestle, Colgate, Palmolive. All these return ratios are in excess of maybe 60, 70%. Followed by IT companies where TCS is at the highest, and maybe at about, I think TCS has the highest ROE. So basically, if you look at the hierarchy, right at the bottom, you have your infra stocks and your media stocks where the return on equity is the lowest. There are various factors which would affect return on equity. Let's look at the numerator. You're basically looking at net income, right? So the factors that would affect profits, if you want a higher ROE, which is, desirable, either, your net income will have to be higher or your shareholders equity needs to be lower. That's the only way you are going to be able to enjoy a higher ROE. Now your net income basically, for a company that enjoys, say, a monopoly, in the market, or if it's a company that is debt free, which means there is no interest cost, or if the company is a market leader, then they are able to command the kind of prices that you want, and hence you will enjoy better margins. Or it's a company that has a large scale of operation, which means if they're going to be able to get better raw material prices. These are all the various different factors. Or it's a company that enjoys some kind of, say, tax benefits or tax exemptions. These are all the different factors which are going to lead to higher profits. So if your numerator is going to increase, Assuming that your denominator doesn't change, your ROE is going to increase. But like I said right at the beginning, ROE should not be looked at in isolation. It is very important to take a look at the overall balance sheet of the company, to also see the proportion of debt on the balance sheet. Um, so assuming that your size of equity is very small, but you have a disproportionate level of debt on your books, then while ROE would appear extremely high, it may not be the correct parameter to look at the company. Hence, we move on to our next ratio, which basically is return on capital employed. Now, just to say one point that I missed out in ROE is that generally, ROEs of 15 to 20% and upwards is considered to be good. However, of course, like if you see in banks, banks tend to have lower ROEs. They will be in the band of 5 to 15%. But does it mean that it's a bad investment? Absolutely not. Hence, none of this can be seen in isolation. None of this is black or white. I'm trying to simplify this, and hence, I'm trying to tell you 15 to 20% is generally a good benchmark that would largely hold true for, say, non-financial companies. But in financials, like I said, for banks, it's 5 to 15%. But up until now, we were overweight on this sector. Hence, obviously, 5 to 15% is good. So it's very important to understand the ROE profile of our of different sectors in order to be able to interpret a ROE correctly. So if it's a IGL and enjoying a ROE of say 30%, and you have a Unilever enjoying a ROE of say 95%, does that mean one doesn't invest in IGL? Not the case. So it's very, very important to understand that there are ROEs which are inherent to certain sectors. So anybody who wants to, just get a broad range on ROEs, maybe I'll send it across to all of you later. Moving to return on capital employed. Like I just told y'all, looking at ROE in isolation will never make sense. More often than not, it will give you a very distorted picture. Hence, it is very important to look at return on capital employed. Now, capital employed basically means the total capital employed, which means debt plus equity. And obviously, it's a more comprehensive measure because it includes both debt and equity. And it also helps us to understand how effectively leverage is being used. All debt is not bad. So let's understand that first. A lot of people will just think that, oh, if a company borrows, then it's bad. But all debt is not bad. If by borrowing money you are able to generate returns in excess of your cost of borrowing, then the debt is good. So debt is also what sometimes fuels growth. So obviously all debt is not bad. And ROC is useful for companies which are capital intensive and have significant debt. And like I said, it should be greater than the company's cost of borrowing. Now, one other thing that I wanted to actually, which I missed out in ROE, is, I think we need to understand why ROE would also appear depressed sometimes. So if you see a lot of pharma companies, MNC pharma companies, or maybe FMCG companies, they generate tremendous amount of cash. And if you allow this cash to just sit in your balance sheet, obviously your balance sheet size is going up, and hence, your return ratios will appear lower because your denominator is increasing. Right? Like I just explained, like either you increase your numerator for this ratio to improve, or you reduce your denominator to improve this ratio. But if you are going to let your denominator expand without your numerator going up, obviously you're looking at a lower ratio. Hence, a lot of these companies, what they do is they will distribute this dividend this cash in form of dividend. So either you deploy it back into the business and then let it generate returns, or then you give away that cash as dividends to shareholders, which also then eventually leads to a higher PE multiple, because then over a period of time, you're constantly rewarding your shareholders. And by doing away with that cash on your balance sheet, you're ensuring that your balance sheet size remains small, it remains limited, which means therefore obviously your profits are going to keep going up. Obviously, your net worth will also increase, but by allowing the cash to sit unutilized in the balance sheet, your balance sheet size was going up. Hence, your return ratios were going to appear lower. So, while when you're doing a lot of this ratio analysis, you also need to be cognizant of the factors that lead to or depress your ratios in order to get a more clear picture. So coming back to ROCE, the formula for ROCE is nothing but your earnings before interest and tax divided by your capital employed, which will be your debt plus equity expressed as a percentage. Now, coming to for this session, we are basically going to be talking about return on assets. So basically, well, this ratio tells you how profitable the company is relative to its asset base. Obviously, for very capital intensive businesses, the asset base is very large, say as compared to an IT business, where you naturally don't need machinery or you don't have to invest in any of that. Hence, in this case, ROA will appear higher for a service or or the IT business versus any manufacturing business. So again, can you compare these two ROAs, ROA of a capital intensive business and the ROA of a service or a technology business? Absolutely not, because that is going to give you a very, very skewed picture. Hence, ROA is best used when you're comparing companies in the same industry, or like when you're looking at a company's performance over a period of time. Best if ROAs are consistent or they're on an upward trajectory. ROAs is also something that is used mainly for banks and NBFCs. The reason being that ROA, well, again, financials actually follows a very different, P&L and balance sheet, and I will not get into that in detail. But if I have to just put it very simply for all of you, the return on equity of a bank is what you will look at if you want to invest in a bank as an investor, as any investor in the market. But ROA is basically going to be the ratio you're going to look at if you are a depositor or a borrower of funds from the bank. Now, the ROA also essentially tells you how well the bank is utilizing its equity to leverage itself and be able to lend more. Slightly complicated, so we will not get into it too much. I think what you need to understand is that higher the ROA, better it is. And ROA is more significant for banks and NBFCs. And the formula for ROA is nothing but your net profit divided by your average total assets. By average, we mean current year plus last year divided by 2 multiplied by 100. So we've covered we've covered ROE, ROCE, ROA, very, very important ratios. These form a part of the hygiene factors. Cash conversion cycle is also very important because it tells you how long money is remaining tied up, hence how much liquidity you have available. So this is what I wanted to cover in today's session. Our next session will be on efficiency ratios and leverage ratios. I discussed those right at the start of the presentation. My endeavor, again, I'd like to say is that, when I'm teaching you all these basic concepts, well, we're not in school, we're not in college. So obviously, I don't expect you all to by heart and know the formulas. I will, like I said, however, share some, exercises for you all so that you all understand how these ratios are being calculated. But my reason for teaching you all these concepts or introducing these terms to you all is so that when you all lift a report written by an analyst from PL, you all know how to interpret what is there on that report. Also, when you all speak to clients, you all are able to explain to a client, what we mean by a ROE or a ROA or a ROCE, it's very important that when we speak to clients, we're aware of what we are talking. It should never sound like, we just by hearting something and blurting it out. So my reason for explaining all of this to you is, and also so that, eventually all of you all on your own, maybe a few sessions down, we will look into Screener as a product, and how we can use a screener, and how we can set certain parameters and benchmarks over there in order to be able to run establish filters, and then run queries on your own, so that you can generate your own output. So over there, ROE and ROCE are going to be extremely critical, which is why I was explaining these concepts to you all today. I hope I have been able to I've tried my level best to simplify this as much as I can and put it in layman's language for all to understand. I hope I've been able to achieve some of it. And in case any of y'all have any questions, y'all may feel free to ask me those questions now, or even if you send me an email, or any of y'all wish to get in touch, you may get in touch with me. So thank you very much.